Well, thanks for staying with us on The Real Story. We are sitting down with all the candidates of the state's biggest races with just a little over a week left until Election Day. Last week, we spoke to Dominic Rapini, the GOP nominee for Secretary of the State, and now we're sitting down with the other candidate, Democrat Stephanie Thomas, who says that the fight for democracy is personal and has focused her platform on expanding voting rights and restoring trust in our elections. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining me this morning.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Okay, so tell us about your background and why you want to run for office. You're currently a state representative.
Correct, but I come from a business background and a nonprofit background. My entire career has been as a nonprofit fundraiser for 30 years, but while I was in graduate school getting my master's degree in nonprofit management, I ended up working for a for-profit consulting company, and I rose from intern to company president. I went on later to open my own business, working for nonprofits. I have been a state representative only since I took office in 2021, but I've had the pleasure of vice chairing our elections committee. And since I got politically involved, it occurred to me that there was a lot more we could do through the Secretary's office to teach people about how government works and maybe more importantly, how they can make government work for them. So that is really part of the foundation of why I'm running.
Okay, so you want to increase education and awareness for elections in our state. How are you going to do that?
Sure. Civic education, but also civic engagement, and not just for young people, but for adults as well. You know, I get so many queries, everything from how do I correctly fill out and submit my absentee ballot, and what's the difference between my state rep and my congressional rep. So the Secretary's office, I think we should have a YouTube channel, absolutely, that would demystify some of these processes and make it easy to understand. I will definitely be going out into the community to teach people through repetition in time, using trusted messengers, much like we did with the complete count committees with the census, just making sure people understand, one, how to vote safely, but also how to then, I call it, use your vote. I think living in this representative form of democracy requires our active participation beyond Election Day. And we can't just fill in that bubble and then abdicate our responsibility.
There's a lot of attention on this race, even more so than other years because of the 2020 presidential election. When you're looking at the way we do elections here in Connecticut, what can we do better?
Sure. There are certainly things we can do better. There has been, I think, a bit of a false narrative out there about the need for strict voter ID. I have done a lot of research. The Heritage Foundation, for example, which is a very conservative think tank, I searched all of their records of election fraud in Connecticut, and there was literally not one case since 1988, and their records only go back that far, of any voter impersonation fraud. It is so rare. I think what we do need to focus on here in Connecticut, three things: making sure that our election workers have the infrastructure, hardware, software to do their job effectively, because sometimes mistakes happen. We have to train our election workers. Like every industry, we saw a lot of retirements. So we have a lot of new election workers. So we have to make sure that both they are trained up, but also all of the poll workers who only work on Election Day. And lastly, I think civic education and civic engagement. I'll say it once, I'll say it many times. We talk a lot about voter fraud, but I say there's a big difference between voter fraud and voter mistakes. And voters make a lot of mistakes because they are unaware of what is and isn't allowed. And I think that would actually help us cut down on any incidents we do have.
Your challenger, brought this up during the debate. You were talking about how you felt like there was an acceptable risk of fraud because of the amount of people who have voted. 1.8 million people, I think, is what you had said. Your opponent, even on the show when he came on, was saying that you were talking about how there's an acceptable fraud, is how he explained it. I had said acceptable risk, which is what you had said.
Correct.
But explain your position on that to people. Just clarify for us.
Sure. And we were talking about voter ID. There has always been fraud in every system created, I would say. I think on the debate, he said something like, I'm happy you don't work for a bank where they have zero fraud tolerance. That's not true. I'm sure you, like I, and everyone else I know has gotten, there's been a fraudulent attempt on your account. You just keep improving systems to cut down and minimize risk. So here in Connecticut, same thing, Heritage Foundation, if you look at all the cases of fraud over the last 10 years, under 40 cases, and 26 of those were the ones that were just adjudicated in Stamford. So very small percentage on average. We're talking 0.0003. So if you have 40 cases in 10 years against 18 million votes, it's an acceptable risk, and whenever anything happens, you try to close that loophole. But as a leader, you have to understand that there will always be bad actors, and it's not limited to any particular political party. Some people just like to cheat systems. There's always that person who drives to the front of the column on the highway and cuts over at the last minute. Same with elections. So we just have to make sure we close as many loopholes as possible.
We only have about 2 minutes left, but I do want to talk about early voting because it is on the ballot.
Yeah.
It would be a change to our Constitution. We're one of only 4 states who doesn't have early voting.
Correct.
Your opponent was bringing up concerns about the cost of doing early voting. He's not a supporter of it. Explain to me where you think, if you think Connecticut can handle whatever said cost is. Where do you stand on that?
Yeah, his cost is predicated on the fact if we opened every single polling place and staffed it the way we do on Election Day. No states do that. Most states have what they call like a vote center model. It might be one office in a county, it might be a couple of locations, or it might be at town hall, which is usually open anyway. I feel confident there will be an added cost, so I will be fighting for a short window with the state, making sure we don't push that cost off to individual towns. But I feel like 46 other states have figured it out. All of the U.S. territories have figured it out. I think Connecticut is up to the challenge of figuring it out too.
One last message for voters.
Vote on November 8th. It's Election Day. I just want 100% participation. I really urge everyone to go out and vote, no matter who you vote for.
And we anticipate it's going to be high, right? Because we have so many offices. I mean, we have U.S. Senate, we have all the Constitution offices, the legislature, we have our congressional offices all up. So a lot of people will be on the ballot, and hopefully a lot of people go out and vote on November 8th, Tuesday. Wow, it's coming up quick.
Yes.
All right, Stephanie Thomas, thank you so much for coming on. Candidate for Secretary of the State. And in case you missed it last week on The Real Story, we had a discussion with Stephanie's GOP challenger, Dominic Rapini, on how he would run the Secretary of the State's office if elected. As always, you can find that and all of our past segments at fox61.com, on the Fox 61 News app, or streaming on Fox 61 Plus. And that does it for us on The Real Story. Again, if you want to rewatch or share these segments, head to fox61.com or download the Fox 61 app and watch The Real Story every Sunday at 10 a.m. right here on Fox 61. Have a great morning.